All right, so let's continue talking about the different types of energy. So potential energy, it's the energy that is stored in the chemical bonds. So the reason why it's called potential energy is because that's energy that is stored that we could potentially use to do something. Okay. Now, kinetic energy is also referred to as energy in motion. And whenever one type of energy is converted into another type of energy, some of that energy is lost as heat. So heat is basically created by the random movement of molecules. And like I said, whenever you're converting one type of energy to another, some of that energy is lost as heat. So let me give you a silly example that I use in my class to demonstrate the different types of energy. So imagine that you have a rock on the very top of a hill. That rock has the potential to roll down the hill. So on the very top, that will be considered, if you will, potential energy. And now if you give the rock a little push, if you give a little kick, then the rock is going to start rolling down the hill. So we went from potential energy, like when the rock was on the top, and now the rock is moving, right? It's rolling. So that will be considered kinetic energy, energy in motion. And as this rock is rolling down, it's creating friction, and that friction is basically heat, if you will, or energy that's being dissipated in the form of heat. Now, in this example that your book uses, we're talking about a cyclist, and this cyclist is going to be consuming a granola bar. In that granola bar, it has potential chemical energy. Potential chemical energy, right? Because that bar is made out of carbohydrates. And if you guys remember, carbohydrates are basically big molecules that are made out of a bunch of glucoses that are bonded together. Okay, so again, whenever the cyclist is consuming the granola bar, it's basically consuming potential chemical energy, right? So it's basically the energy that is stored in chemical bonds. So whenever that cyclist digests or consumes the granola bar, then what our body does is that it breaks down that complex carbohydrate. So it breaks down those bonds and it releases energy. It releases that energy that now our body can actually use it in order to power, in this case, the bicycle. And now the cyclist is using that energy in order to power the bicycle. So we went from potential energy in the form of the granola bar to now kinetic energy, right? Energy in motion. And whenever the cyclist is pedaling, its body temperature is increasing, right? And so that means that some of the energy is being released as heat. So we go from potential energy to kinetic energy to heat. So whenever we go from one type of energy to a different type, some of that energy is lost as heat. And this is why, like say for example, in the case of us humans, right? We have to keep eating in order to replenish the energy that was lost as heat. So does that mean that that energy that was lost as heat is that energy gone forever? No. That energy is gonna be transformed to a different type. So let's say, for example, to potential energy. Yes, if you guys remember, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be transformed. So that's the law of conservation of energy. So again, that energy that was lost as heat is just going to be transformed to a different types. For example, potential energy. Okay, so let's talk about photosynthesis. So if you were to look at a plant leaf under a microscope, one of the things that you will see is that that leaf is made out of a bunch of cells. And within those cells, you're gonna see that there are a bunch of little green circles. Basically, like the plant is completely full of green circles. And the question is, what are those green circles? So those green circles are chloroplasm. So chloroplasm is the organelle that the plant uses in order to capture the energy from the sun in order to produce the energy that the plant needs, or the food, if you will, in order the plant needs in order to stay alive. So plant is considered an autotroph. So an autotroph, it's any organism that is able to produce their own food. In the case of plants, they actually use the energy from the sun in order to produce, in this case, carbohydrates. So in the case of plants, they basically use carbon dioxide and they use water in order to produce carbohydrates. So when you think about our planet, and I'm talking about our planet, the ultimate energy source for our planet is the sun. Basically, if you get rid of the sun, you can potentially wipe out all life in our planet. So autotrophs are organisms that capture the energy from the sun in order to do photosynthesis, in order to produce their own food. So autotrophs are basically organisms that can produce their own food, and some of them actually use the energy from the sun in order to do photosynthesis. Now, on the other hand, heterotrophs are organisms that they obtain the energy that they need by eating autotrophs or by eating other heterotrophs. So essentially, heterotrophs, they cannot produce their own food. They have to obtain the food by eating autotrophs or by eating other heterotrophs. And a silly question that I ask my students is like, are we as humans, am I a autotroph or a heterotroph? And the answer that I get from them is like, oh no, you're a heterotroph. And I say, well, wait a minute. I can actually cook, I promise. I can cook, so I can make my own food, right? And they laugh because, no, even though I can cook, what's happening here is that I'm using something that is already available. Okay, so I'm still not, basically, obtaining the energy from the sun, if you will, in order to produce my own food. I'm basically using something that is already there.